So renal anatomy. It contains the cortex and medulla, renal cortex and medulla. So cortex contains most of the nephrons, and medulla it contains the loop of the Henle of the nephron. So juxtamedullary nephrons are very close to the medullary, where the biofeedback occurs. Tubular secretion of hormones, everything occurs. So the fluid is formed by capillary filtration, which enters into the tubules and subsequently transferred, modified by transport process, resulting in the urine, and which enters into the ureter. So each kidney contains more than million nephrons. So what are the functions of the nephrons? So as the water, electrolytes, glucose, amino acids, urea, uric acid are entered through the glomerulus and it enters into the proximal tubule. So what are the functions of the proximal tubule is the most important one. Proximal tubule is important one because proximal tubule is the more important one because in obstructive uropathy it is the first it is the most common thing to be affected, and it leads into the obstructive uropathy. It leads into the renal fibrosis. So in the proximal tubule, the function of proximal tubule is reabsorption of sodium, chloride, water, bicarbonate, glucose protein, amino acids, potassium, magnesium, calcium phosphate, uric acid, urea. So the secretion of organic anions and cations will be there in the proximal tubule. So as it enters into the solution, enters into the loop of Henle, there will be more absorption of sodium, chloride, water, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, which is more concentrated urine occurs. So as the loop of Henle goes, it establishes a concentration gradient within the medulla. So when we reach the distal tubule, there will be more reabsorption of sodium, chloride, water, potassium, calcium, carbonate. So active process and passive process occurs in collecting tubule. So that sodium and chloride occurs in active process with sodium potassium ATPase, and passive process of potassium. This is so hydrogen ion and bicarbonate will come out. So when we get into the collecting duct, reabsorption of still occurs sodium, chloride, water, potassium bicarbonate, and secretions of uh, hydrogen ion potassium occurs. So the collecting duct, it enters into the macula densa. It's connecting to the macula densa to the Bowman's capsule, and because of the regular autoregulator mechanism, juxtaglomerulus is activated. Secretion of renin occurs when there is decrease in the renal blood flow or decrease in GFR. So this is renin angiotensin aldosterone axis, where the main pathway for secretion, where water and salt retention, circulating volume increased, and perfusion of the juxtaglomerular apparatus increases along with this. So when there is kidney perfusion is decreased because of hypovolemia, decreased hypovolemia, blood loss, there is decrease in renal perfusion. So which activates the juxtaglomerular apparatus, which releases renin release is released. So already the liver has produced angiotensinogen, which converts angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. So which is further converted to angiotensin 2 by angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor. So angiotensin converting enzyme, which is secreted by the lungs, pulmonary renal endothelium. So what the main angiotensinogen 2, it increases sympathetic activity of the kidney and retain the which acts on the vascular arterial smooth muscles, which helps in the retention of means pre-arterial vasoconstriction. And angiotensin 2, there is tubular sodium potassium reabsorption, potassium excretion, and water retention when there is loss of water. And it stimulates adrenal gland, which helps in aldosterone secretion, which further acts on the distal tubule, where the sodium and water and salt retention. So angiotensin 2 leads to arterial vasoconstriction, increase in blood pressure, and it also acts on pituitary gland, where ADH is secreted, which acts on the collecting duct, leading to water reabsorption. So this is a common mechanism what happens if there is decrease in renal perfusion because of obstructive uropathy, or there is an acute obstructive uropathy because of different causes. So when we come to the pathophysiology, the introduction goes like this with pathophysiology of urinary tract obstruction. In 1950, Bell described that 3.5% of the autopsy cases until 20 years there is no gender difference between in obstructive uropathy, congenital obstructive uropathy. And when we come to the 20 to 60 years of age, females are most common. They may present with because of the reproductive age group, because of pregnancy, they are most common. More than 60 years, males are more common, and prevalence is more common in urinary tract obstruction according to the age. So according to Tan et al. In 1994, he said that hydronephrosis and hydrotracheal they present at 35.9% of the urinary tract abnormalities. So in 2015, one more study, it says that obstructive neuropathies constitute a single largest entity leading to renal insufficiency in male children younger than 1 year of age. So the introduction. So then what are the causes of congenital obstructive uropathy? So renal causes are obstruction at uretropelvic junction, aberrant vessel at the uretropelvic junction, polycystic kidney, and renal cyst. So ureter, what are the common causes of ureter causing obstruction? Ureterocele, vesicourinary junction obstruction, ureteral valve, ectopic ureter with obstruction, retrocaval ureter, vesicoureter reflex stricture. So, so when we come to the bladder and urethra, post-urethral valve is most common, followed by congenital urethral stricture, hydrocolpus, phimosis with VX4. So, next is, what are the factors contributing to congenital obstructive uropathy, nephropathy, and to subsequent progression to chronic disease? You can see in the chart, I can mention that there are the risk factors, means the mother at the fetus level. So, risk factors associated with congenital obstructive uropathy. So, in the fetus, they present with mutations they can have, and maternal environment, mother will be having a diet change, diabetes, and obesity, which leads with there may present with acute kidney injury and decreased birth weight, intrauterine growth retardation, prematurity. All the factors lead to congenital obstructive uropathy. And with this, there will be renal maldevelopment and residual obstruction will be there in the risk factors mentioned. So what happens is fetus. So when after delivery, there will be recurrent acute kidney injury where acute obstruction occurs, leading to ischemia, hypoxia, urinary tract infections, leading to nephrotoxins are released and causing the renal failure. So what happens is gradually, as the age progresses from infancy or childhood to the adulthood and to the old age, gradually the acute kidney injury episodes increases and nephron numbers or tubular mass gradually decreases. So some studies says that even the congenital obstructive uropathy prenatally presented and postnatally relieved also, they present with decreased number of nephrons and tubular mass gradually decreases over the age increases. So there is no particular to say that with the obstruction relief, the patient will improve immediately after surgery, but it's not like that. But gradually the nephron number, tubular mass decreases, the child gradually progresses into chronic kidney disease. So in acute kidney injury, because of this obstruction, ischemia, hypoxia, in between there will be recovery and maintenance will be there and repair will be there. But gradually, this one shows that progression gradually increases, and because of nitric oxide and some hormones released, gradually the kidney progresses and into the chronic kidney disease and end-stage renal failure. So pathophysiology of, we can make it into unilateral obstruction, bilateral obstruction. So you can say the unilateral obstruction with, you can take it as unilateral ureteral obstruction. It has in the pathophysiology we see that there is a triphasic pattern is seen where the renal blood flow and ureteral pressure changes occurs. So what happens was in during first 2 hours. So normally what we are seeing is this one is all in the porcine model, or it is a which occurs, which is experimental done sham operation with the rats it was done. So during the first 1 to 2 hours, renal blood flow increases and is accompanied by high pressure in tubule and collecting system pressure is seen. So over the 3 to 4 hours, the pressures remain elevated, but renal blood flow begins to gradually decline. But after 4 hours, what happens is there is further decline in the renal blood flow and decrease in glomerular capillary pressure, and also the collecting system pressure decreases. So this is the flow chart I am telling you. This is the ureter pressure, the red one. The blue one is the renal blood flow. What happens in the first 2 hours? You can see both pressures are increased. Ureteral pressure is increased and renal blood flow pressure is increased. In 2 to 6 hours, what happened was renal blood flow decreases, but ureteral pressure gradually increases. But after 6 hours, what happens is both the pressures gradually decrease over time, and there will be obstructive uropathy, and the upper tracts are involved where they lead to fibrosis. So what happens? The alteration in flow dynamics occurs within the kidney due to changes in the biochemical, hormonal, regulating the renal reticulum. So what happens in the 3 phases? We can take it as 3 phases. What happens in phase 1 is the increased glomerular capillary pressure is counterbalanced by increase in the renal blood flow via renal vasodilatation, which limits to the it limits the glomerular filtration rate. So what are the main contributing factors for the unilateral obstruction is prostaglandin E2 and nitric oxide. So what happens for the Afferent arteriole vasodilatation will be there. Because of this, there will be net renal vasodilatation early in the unilateral obstruction. What happens in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 is there is an increase in afferent arterial resistance, causing decrease in the renal plasma flow. What happens is that gradually the shift in renal blood flow from the outer cortex to the inner cortex occurs, gradually reducing the glomerular filtration rate. So, what are the mediators of what happens in unilateral obstruction is there is a pre-glomerular, that is afferent arterial vasoconstriction occurs, trying to reduce the glomerular filtration rate. What are the most common hormones used in this is angiotensin II, thromboxane A2, endothelin. So what happens is the pre-glomerular vasoconstriction occurs, reducing the increase the renal blood flow and maintaining the GFR. So what
Dheeraj, go slow.
Yes, sir.
Because so the whole purpose is you have to understand. Everybody has to understand. If you keep on just reading the slide, it's difficult to understand, isn't it?
Yes.
So go slow so that people can understand.
Yes. Okay, sir. Sir, in what are the hemodynamic changes observed in bilateral ureteral occlusion is? So initially there will be increase in renal blood flow for lasting for 90 minutes. There and followed by prolonged and profound decrease in renal blood flow will be seen more than the unilateral obstruction. So what happens was the internal distribution of blood flow changes from the inner to the outer cortex in bilateral obstruction, which is opposite of the unilateral obstruction. So the hemodynamic changes completely when it is bilateral compared to the unilateral. So what happens was in bilateral, there will be accumulation of vasoactive substances. Most commonly recently detected was ANP and atrial natriuretic peptide that contributes to pre-glomerular vasodilatation. What happens in unilateral is there will be vasoconstriction, but what happens here is pre-glomerular vasodilatation occurs and post-glomerular vasoconstriction occurs in bilateral. So why this occurs? Because in unilateral you can see that other kidney, the obstructed kidney, the substances are excreted with the normal kidney so that it tries to compensate the other kidney. But in bilateral obstruction kidney, both kidneys are affected so that the excretion of the vasoactive means vasoactive peptides are not excreted. Bilaterally it is increased and leads to the cardiac failure, which releases the atrial natriuretic peptide, which causes the systemic effects. So so normally what we see is in bilateral obstruction, when obstruction is GFR and renal blood flow remain depressed due to persistent vasoconstriction of the afferent arteriole, and with accumulation of the sodium, potassium, and urine, everything water, there is a post-operative diuresis is more compared to the unilateral ureteral obstruction. So in bilateral obstruction, what are the damages? Most common what we see is congenital is posturethral valve. So what happens when bilateral it is involved? Means the damages caused by posturethral valve, that is bilateral outer obstruction causing bilateral obstructive uropathy. So what happens is lung pulmonary hyperplasia will be seen in antenatally. It continues postnatally, child will be very fatal. So there will be long-term complaints. Infant survives. In the kidney, there will be gradual progressive glomerular injury with obstructive uropathy, and effect will be reversible renal insufficiency if you release it, but usually improves with initial treatment but can recur with bladder dysfunction as the natural history goes, means after the relief of the obstruction. And one more thing is dysplasia of the kidney occurs with there is chronic obstructive uropathy, and there will be irreversible renal insufficiency occurs, and the child made the natural history of the PUV, if there is dysplasia is there is permanent level of renal damage, which there will be limiting growth and leading to progressive renal failure, and hypertension occurs in chronically. So tubular injury also occurs with the PUV. As I told you, the proximal tubule is commonly affected, and it will lead to enable to limit sodium and water loss, and progressive natural history is that it increases progressive with age, and they present with nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. So what happens with bladder? So bladder, as there will be poor sensation, hypercontracted the bladder, and low compliance of the bladder will be there, and leading to myogenic failure, leading to poor emptying. So with the PUV, if there is chronic, the bladder problems are lifelong and change with age, and depending on that, we can plan for further management. So what happens in the ureter is there will be poor contractility because gross dilatation of the ureter occurs bilaterally, and and there will be no much contractility will be reduced, and it has inability to cope and transport urine occurs. So most will improve initially, but because of the chronic hydronephrosis, they will be having chronic hydronephrosis because of the contractility of the muscles are extended, and there will be poor contractility. So when we come to the summary of the bilateral and unilateral obstruction, so as I mentioned that renal blood flow is increased initially, and GFR is initially increased in the first 1 to 2 hours unilateral obstruction, and changes are mainly mediated by the nitric oxide and prostaglandin E2. When we come to the mid phase in this one unilateral obstruction, both are decreased. There will be decreased renal blood flow and glomerular filtration rate, and there is afferent arterial constriction increase, and there is increased tubule and afferent arteriole. And as we go in the late 24 hours of the phase of the unilateral obstruction, there is a decreased renal blood flow and decreased glomerular filtration rate. Main changes are made mainly due to nitric oxide. When compared to this bilateral obstruction, it is mainly by atrial natriuretic peptide. So when we come to the partial ureteral obstruction, so changes in renal hemodynamics and tubular function changes. So normally it is done in the animal models where changes occurs. The changes means hemodynamic changes occurs slowly. So animal studies, they say that normal function recovery is observed in 14 days if relieved early, and if it is after 25 days, recovery function will be 31%. If it is more than 60%, 60 days of partial uterine obstruction, recovery will be only 8% if the obstruction is relieved. So what are the effects on tubular function is, there will be dysregulation of aquaporin channels in the proximal tubule, descending loop and collecting tubule, leading to polyuria.
Dheeraj.
Sir?
Yeah, just go back to the previous slide.
Sir? Sir?
The previous slide, that partial ureteric obstruction.
Yes, sir.
No, you showed.
Yes.
So just we couldn't really understand that animal studies difficult to imitate partial obstruction, but when they did a partial obstruction, what exactly it means? 14 days obstruction, the kidney can completely recover.
Yes, sir. After relieving, we can
28
completely recover.
days.
31%
Okay. So
function
partial
is
obstruction means exactly what? Is creating VUJ or mid-ureteric stricture, are they ligating it? How they're doing it? Did you look into the, because see, you say 60 days if there is obstruction, partial obstruction, that means it's only 8% of the kidney can recover. Remaining everything will get damaged.
Yes, sir.
That's what you're telling.
Yes, sir.
So, for example, in that context, our PUJ also is a partial
Yes, sir.
obstruction.
Yes, sir.
Most VUJs, what we see is a partial obstruction. None of them are complete obstructions. So, if the partial obstruction can cause so much of potential damage to the kidney, so it's difficult to really understand how that whole thing is done, the experiments.
Yes, sir. They mentioned that develop more slowly, but in the animal studies, it's not normally seen. But in animal studies, they mentioned like this, sir.
So how did they do it? How did they create partial obstruction in animal studies? Did they ligate it? Did they put a clip? How did they do it? Okay, I think you should check it back, recheck this, because this is it's not what generally what we understood. Like a partial obstruction, there is no urgency to jump in and do anything, especially if it is a unilateral obstruction. Prenatally, we don't really intervene that. Now we say, but 68 days obstruction, so it lead to so much of functional damage. Whatever it is, that authenticity, you need to look into it. Okay, so it's not the general understanding what we have.
Is it applicable to adult studies? That's what I think. May not be applicable to pediatric congenital studies.
Okay,
and
sir.
in adult studies, you have models for partial obstruction like calculus, tumor development, and vascular involvement, and all that.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
But
sir.
I don't know whether you have any such model for partial ureteral obstruction in pediatric disease models. So I don't think you have.
Sir, it's adult model only, sir. It's not pediatric.
Yeah.
Means it's animal studies, sir. Their studies I have quoted, sir. Sir, I have taken from the Campbell, sir.
No, how do you extrapolate? That's what Dr. Babu is
Yes, sir.
asking you. How do you extrapolate this to our pediatric diseases? Which diseases will fit into this model? That's what he is asking. Partial urethral obstruction, which model will fit into it? As far as this 14 days,
Yes, sir.
28 days, 60 days, that time duration goes, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So it most
You got
likely
it
is all
from Campbell? You got it from Campbell?
stones.
Yes, sir. It's a stone, sir. Sir, stone, sir.
Okay.
Campbell Adult Urology.
Okay.
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 So that means, for example, if you take the same thing, if we have a ureteric stone which is partially obstructing, causing hydronephrosis, so this may be the problems. So even
Yes, sir.
probably a teenager or pediatric stone disease, partial obstruction. Partial obstruction, I don't know. So many times we see the stone disease coming to us with hydronephrosis, but still function is remain.
Yes, sir.
But we have seen a complete obstruction causing almost 0% function in caused by stones only. The upper ureteric stones causing complete obstruction. So we have seen that. Maybe the pathology get in children. So I think we, as Ramses says,
Yes.
it is applicable probably in adults, and maybe a partial obstruction can be created in them.
Yes. Yes. Sir, okay. So what happens
Yeah,
with
go.
yes. So effects of obstruction tubular function, sir. So there will be dysregulation of the aquaporin water channels in the proximal tubule, descending loop, and collecting tubule, sir. So what happens in this? The child presents with polyuria and impaired concentrating ability capacity will be there because of the obstruction, of the tubular function. So sodium transport is decreased. So what we see is in obstructive uropathy, the sodium transport is decreased with, as I mentioned that. So what happens was there is much of a greater and volume after relief of obstruction compared to the compared with unilateral obstruction. Bilateral obstruction, there is more sodium and water excretion after release of the bilateral obstruction. That means there is much more damage in bilateral obstruction compared to the unilateral obstruction on the tubular function. So in potassium and phosphate accretions, along with sodium, it follows, and after relief of obstruction, there is only sodium is more compared to the this one, sir, in unilateral obstruction, but increased transiently with bilateral obstruction and parallel with the massive diuresis will be present in the bilateral after relief of the obstruction of bilateral. So and there will be deficient in urinary acidification because the tubular function is decreased. The where we see the bicarbonate and this hydrogen ion exchange will occur. Because of that, urinary acidification will be lost. And changes in peptide excretion occurs, and where you can see the urinary biomarkers. I will mention in detail later. Excretion, they may describe the marked renal damage will present when they are present in the urinary biomarkers. So, sir, when we go to cellular or molecular changes, which lead to the fibrosis and tubular cell death. So, what we see is there is obstruction leads to the biochemical, immunological, hemodynamic, and functional changes of the kidney, as I mentioned. So, the cascade of events occurs. So, which leads to the cascade of events because of the obstruction, which leads to the release of the angiotensin II, cytokines, and growth factors. Most commonly, transforming growth factor beta, tumor necrosis factor, NFKB. So these mediators, they are directly produced from the renal tubular cells and interstitial cells from the other, and they are produced from other cells, macrophages also. That, as I mentioned, that fibroblasts and macrophages. So progressive and permanent changes damage to the kidney occur because I will mention the flow chart, sir. Because of this, and leading to tubular interstitial fibrosis, tubular atrophy and apoptosis will occur, and leading to interstitial inflammation and going in for total fibrosis. So this is a total flow chart where we can see the molecular level of interstitial fibrosis, in the extracellular matrix deposition occurs and leading to kidney damage. So the main culprit is the, as I mentioned, that angiotensin II tumor. When sir, as I mentioned, that there is capillary loss of the kidney leading to hypoxemia and ischemia will occur. Uh, and interstitial fibroblasts are released, hematopoietic stem cells are released, and monocyte macrophage system is activated, where the cell survival will be decreased and leading to apoptosis, sir. And the main culprit is the this one macrophages, where it releases tumor growth factor beta 1, leading to renal interstitial fibroblast, which leads to the myofibroblast, and stress fibers are released, alpha smooth muscle actin, which can be used as a urinary biomarker also. I'll be mentioning that. So which can be, means it's almost the cells are destroyed, and leading to extracellular matrix deposition, and where tissue plasminogen activator occurs and ECM extracellular magnetic degradation occurs, leading to fibrosis. So this is a cascade of events occurs, which gradually the kidney damage occurs and linked to fibrosis. So gross pathological changes occurs. And when we come to the gross pathological changes, in a where we can see the Porcel model is done. So 42 hours of this obstruction, there is dilatation of the pelvis and ureter, and blunting of the papillary tips is seen, and kidney becomes heavier. So at 7 days of obstruction, there is increased pelvic ureteric dilatation and weight will be there, and parenchyma is edematous and thinned out. So and at 20 to 21 days, external dimensions of the kidney are similar, but the cortex and medullary tissue is diffusely thinned out, leading to loss. And 6 weeks, there will be grossly enlarged kidney, and cystic appearance of the kidney will be there, leading to renal failure. When we come to the microscopic pathological findings, at 42 hours of obstruction, there will be lymphatic dilatation, interstitial edema, tubular and glomerular preservation will be there at 42 hours. But at 7 days, there will be collecting duct tubular dilatation, widening of the Bowman space, and the tubular basement membrane thickening will be there, and cell flattening will be there. At 12 days of obstruction, their papillary tip necrosis occurs, and regional tubular destruction occurs, and inflammatory cell response occurs. So after this, in a chronic obstruction is present at 5 to 6 weeks. In histopathology, it shows widespread glomerular collapse will be seen with tubular atrophy, leading to interstitial fibrosis and proliferation of connective tissue in the collecting system, leading to renal failure. So after the renal failure occurs, if there is compensatory renal growth will be there, leading to enlargement of the contralateral kidney with unilateral hydronephrosis or renal algesis occurs. And there will be reduction in the compensatory growth as age grows occurs, because the nephron loss will be gradual, and the compensatory growth gradually decreases along with age. So an increasing number of, as I mentioned, that increasing the number of nephrons or glomeruli does not occur despite there is an increase in size of the kidney. When it try to compensate, what happens renal recovery after obstruction? So how does it recover? So it depends on the degree of obstruction, how much degree it is, and age of the patient, if it's infant, childhood, or old age, and what and baseline renal function affecting change of recovery. So two phases of recovery occurs, commonly tubular function recovery and glomerular filtration recovery. So and it depends on the duration, which has significant influence, as mentioned. Full recovery GFR is seen with relief of acute complete obstruction. Means immediately if we release, there is a full recovery glomerular filtration rate. But longer periods of complete obstruction are associated with diminished return of GFR, as I mentioned. So immediate postnatal outcome. So this one study, renal outcome and bladder outcome. So in renal outcome, studies exploring the long-term renal outcomes in prenatal bladder outer obstruction without in utero intervention showed the conflicting results. But in this study, here Saran et al. Mentioned that outcome of 310 patients and reported development of chronic renal failure in overall patients, which 19% are diagnosed prenatally and 40% in the postnatal group. And according to this study, Matz et al., if the antenatally child has mother is hologartums or ultrasound shows renal cortical cyst, the patient's progressing renal disease had means they present early, means younger gestational age, they go to ESRD at younger gestational age. When you come to the bladder outcome, above et al. Is compared the outcome of the 38 prenatal PUV and 31 postnatal post-uteral walls. He compared there is no significant difference in the incidence of voiding dysfunction at 7.2 years of follow-up. But in boys in prenatal group, there is presence of recurrent febrile UTIs even after the ablation. So in bladder outcome in the ovine model, shunted bladders become non-compliant and fibrotic with distorted muscle layers are seen in ovine model when there is after the bladder out, means bladder outcome in chronic obstructive uropathy. So when we come to the biomarkers, so these are the important evolving stage. Is nothing but the expression of the growth factors that contribute to fibrosis or associated with increased apoptosis in renal epithelium. So it contains cytokines, proteomics. So sir, I'll be telling in the details of the biomarkers. So this is a scheme of tubular proteins regulated with the obstructive injury and urinary biomarkers. So what happens is, as I mentioned that urinary tract obstruction leading to ischemia and hypoxia of the proximal tube means the renal parenchyma occurs, where the proximal tubule is affected, which leading to angiotensin is increased, leading to increased tubular growth factor. So this growth factor beta 1, which present leading to tubular cell death, which leads to tubular glomeruli. So the increase in if there is increase in TGF beta 1 in the urinary, we can take it as a biomarker. So one more thing is in kidney injury molecule is seen one, and neutrophil gelatinous increase in NGAL leading to this is also one of the biomarker for the proximal tubule, sir. So when proximal tubule obstruction occurs and leading to ischemia and hypoxia, there is increase in reactive oxygen species leading to reactive oxygen, which leading to decrease in mitochondria leading to proximal tubular cellular death. So we can take urinary biomarkers from proximal tubule as kidney injury molecule, NGAL, and growth factor beta 1. When we come to the collecting duct, so there is leukocyte L1 leukocyte cellular adhesion molecule, which is also increased in urinary biomarker. When the collecting duct is impaired, there is peritubular smooth muscle actin, where we can see in the urinary biomarker. We can use it as biomarker, which is in progressive stage now. We can use that. When we after that, because of the increase in renal fibrosis, everything, there is increase in macrophage chemotactic proteins, which leading to macrophage recruitment, leading to increased microfibroblasts. So we can take the urinary biomarker as MCP1, which can see the urinary biomarkers, where we can see the prognosis of the kidney is damaging, prognosis of the kidney is bad. So we can, one more thing is estimation of the abnormal fetal kidney function. Fetal GFR determinant of renal function, it's nothing but the surrogate for the severe dysplasia. So what happens, one more thing is filtered by beta-2 microglobulin. So 99% degraded proximal tubular cell. So normal value should be less than 6, but if it is more than 13, there is definitely tubular damage is decreased. And fetal kidney function we can know is normal kidney fetal urine showing. If its sodium is less than 100, chloride is 90, and osmolalite is more than 200, means these are the normal values at a week mean gestational age of 24 weeks. So when we come to the antenatal intervention, after the biomarkers we come to know, there's a lot of, sir, it was already discussed in previous topics regarding this, how to diagnose this one, but I'll be directly going into the antenatal intervention and postnatal outcome. So antenatal intervention, so it should be like case selection as per Johnson. The child should be having normal male karyotype, absence of other fetal anomalies, and maternal oligo or anhydrous or decreasing amniotic fluid are indications case selection for antenatal intervention. So, sir, this is one article showing fetal intervention guidelines for PUV, means bladder outer obstruction. So, what are the fetal intervention? There are 3 stages. So, degree of bladder outer obstruction, there is means the fetal intervention is not indicated if the amniotic fluid is normal, fetal kidneys are normal, there is no renal dysplasia or cortical cysts, and fetal urine biochemistry is favorable, where the beta-2 microglobulin is normal and fetal urine samples are normal. When you come to the stage 2 fetal intervention, it's indicated normally what stage 2, normally what we see is most commonly stage 2, indicated to prevent hypoplasia pulmonary and potentially further means decrease the renal damage. And what are the indications for that is amniotic fluid, it should be less or reduced, fetal kidneys are hypoechogenic, renal dysplasia is absent, but fetal urinary biochemistry is favorable. So most of the time we intervene in this stage 2. And when it comes to the stage 3, fetal intervention is needed to prevent pulmonary hypoplasia, but not renal impairment, because already the child and there is reduced hyperechogenic fetal kidneys, renal dysplasia already has occurred, and fetal urinary biochemistry showing unfavorable for this one. So most of the time fetal intervention we do in stage 2 of this. So what are the common interventions we do antenatal is vesicoamniotic shunting, fetal cystoscopy, and transurethral stenting. So vesicoamniotic shunting, there is 40% perinatal survival rate after successful shunting, with 40% of survivors developing end-stage renal disease on follow-up. And the fetal cystoscopy, it requires maternal fetal anesthesia. It includes antegrade fashion and fashioning and walls visualized and ablated